What if everything you thought you knew about the Bible's book of Genesis was a lie? What if the God you were taught to trust had secrets buried beneath the surface of Scripture? Today, we'll uncover shocking insights into Genesis that might change the way you view this ancient text forever. Buckle up, because we're diving deep into the hidden stories, contradictions, and mysteries that have been right under our noses for centuries. Let's get started. What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about Genesis, the God you were taught to worship, wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistranslation, but a deliberate, calculated lie? A lie designed to keep you blind to the truth. Let's start at the beginning, in the beginning. Those three iconic words paint the picture of a single, omnipotent God creating the heavens and the earth. But here's where it gets fascinating. The original Hebrew text doesn't use the word for God in the singular. It says Elohim. And here's the twist, Elohim isn't a name. It's a plural word. It doesn't mean one God, it means gods. The text is telling us, loud and clear, that creation wasn't the work of a single deity but a council of gods. So why has this critical detail been erased from most modern teachings? To understand, we need to dive into the origins of the Bible. The Bible wasn't written in isolation. It emerged from a melting pot of ancient myths, cultural exchanges, and regional politics. The early Israelites weren't monotheists. They were polytheists, worshipping a pantheon of gods, just like their neighbors in Mesopotamia and Canaan. In fact, Yahweh wasn't even the chief deity in the beginning. That title belonged to El, the father of gods, or Baal, the storm god who ruled over fertility and weather. Yahweh started out as a minor war god, one among many, who later rose to supremacy. So, what does this mean for Genesis? It's not a divine revelation, it's a rebranding campaign. Take Genesis 1, for example. It describes the creation of the world in a poetic, orderly fashion, light and darkness, land and sea, animals and humans. Everything unfolds harmoniously. But if you look closely, you'll notice something peculiar. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 don't even agree. In Genesis 1, the Elohim, the gods, create humanity in their image, male and female, as equal partners. But in Genesis 2, the narrative suddenly shifts. We meet Yahweh, a singular entity, who crafts Adam from dust and turns Eve into a subordinate, created from Adam's rib. These aren't complementary stories, they're competing stories. Genesis 1 elevates humanity as divine reflections. Genesis 2 demotes them to Yahweh's servants. So, what happened? Why the shift? The answer lies in power and control. Yahweh steps into the spotlight, claiming credit for creation and setting the stage for dominance over human thought and worship. This isn't just theology, it's a story of politics, identity, and the reshaping of belief. The question is, are you ready to see the truth hidden in plain sight? What if the story you've been told about Genesis is a tale of power and control, a story where the true voices of creation were silenced, and humanity became collateral damage? In Genesis 1, we see the plural gods, the Elohim, speaking creation into existence. But by the time we reach chapter 2, their voices vanish. Yahweh takes center stage, not as the benevolent creator we've been taught to revere, but as a usurper, rewriting history, seizing the throne, and redefining humanity's role in the process. Let's examine that famous command from Genesis 1, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." It sounds empowering at first glance, doesn't it? But look closer, it's not a blessing. It's a leash. The mandate to multiply isn't about freedom, it's about control. Humanity is told to subdue the earth, but never to question the one issuing the command. Yahweh becomes a divine dictator, micromanaging his subjects under the guise of generosity. Contrast this with the myths that Genesis borrows from. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the gods create humans to labor for them, acting as their servants. In Sumerian myths, the god Enki gifts humanity with knowledge, empowering them to stand on their own. But Genesis flips the script. Yahweh doesn't empower, he restricts. He forbids Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of knowledge, keeping them in ignorance. Is this the act of a loving deity, or a jealous tyrant? If Yahweh's motives seem questionable, they only grow more sinister when you consider how Genesis reshapes the divine hierarchy. It suppresses the roles of other gods and reframes Yahweh as the sole creator. This wasn't just a theological shift, it was a political strategy. The Israelites, exiled in Babylon, needed a unifying story to solidify their identity. By editing Genesis, they didn't just write scripture, they weaponized it. This isn't just a story of faith. It's a story of power, who wields it, who keeps it, and who suffers under it. When we strip away centuries of dogma and read Genesis with fresh eyes, an unsettling truth emerges: Yahweh wasn't the original creator. He wasn't even the original God of Genesis. He was a usurper, erasing the gods who came before him and reshaping humanity's purpose to serve his needs. Now let's revisit the Garden of Eden, one of the most iconic and misunderstood stories in human history. The setup is familiar: Adam and Eve, paradise, forbidden fruit, and the serpent. For centuries, the serpent has been cast as the ultimate villain, the deceiver responsible for humanity's fall. But what if the serpent wasn't the villain at all? What if the serpent's role in the story was something far more radical? For centuries, the serpent in the Garden of Eden has been vilified as the bringer of sin. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the serpent wasn't a villain at all, but a liberator? Let's revisit the scene. Yahweh plants a garden, places Adam and Eve in it, and gives them a single rule: don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Pause for a moment. Why would an all-powerful God create such a tree in the first place? And not just hide it away in some distant corner of the garden, but place it right in the center, visible, tempting, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. What kind of deity sets up their creations for failure like this? Then enters the serpent. The Bible describes it as the craftiest of all animals Yahweh made, but here's the twist: in the original text, the serpent isn't portrayed as evil. It's not Satan. That connection was tacked on centuries later by theologians trying to simplify the narrative. In Genesis, the serpent is just different. It speaks. It questions. It thinks. And what does it actually do? It tells Eve the truth. Think about that. Yahweh tells Adam and Eve, if you eat from this tree, you will surely die. But the serpent says, you won't die. In fact, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like gods, knowing good and evil. And guess what? The serpent was right. Adam and Eve didn't die. Their eyes were opened. They gained knowledge. The serpent didn't deceive them. Yahweh did. Let's dig deeper. In ancient Mesopotamian mythology, serpents weren't symbols of evil. They represented wisdom, rebirth, and even immortality. Take the Sumerian god Enki, often depicted with serpent-like attributes. Enki was a teacher and protector of humanity, known for defying the will of higher gods to give humans what they needed to survive: agriculture, writing, and, yes, knowledge. Sound familiar? Viewed through this lens, the serpent in Genesis isn't a villain. It's a liberator. A bringer of enlightenment. A being willing to challenge Yahweh's imposed ignorance. Adam and Eve weren't cursed because they sinned. They were punished because they dared to seek the truth. And doesn't that punishment seem excessive? Banishment. Pain in childbirth. A lifetime of toil, all for eating a piece of fruit. A fruit that Yahweh himself admits gave them knowledge. After Adam and Eve eat, Yahweh says, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Like one of us. Who is us? It's the Elohim, the plural gods we talked about earlier. Adam and Eve didn't just gain knowledge, they tapped into something divine, something Yahweh wanted to hoard for himself. And he panicked. So, what does Yahweh do? He banishes Adam and Eve from the garden. Not to punish them, but to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and gaining immortality. This wasn't about protecting them. It was about protecting his power. The Garden of Eden isn't a story of humanity's fall from grace. It's a story of humanity's first act of rebellion, and the price of seeking the truth. What if I told you that the story of Adam and Eve isn't about a fall from grace, but a power struggle, a rebellion against a tyrant desperate to maintain control? Let's go back to the moment Adam and Eve were banished from Eden. Yahweh wasn't protecting humanity when he cast them out. He was protecting himself. Why? Because of the other tree, the tree of life. If Adam and Eve ate from it, they would live forever. They would become gods themselves. Yahweh couldn't allow that. He wasn't guiding his children. He was safeguarding his monopoly on divinity. This isn't the story of a loving God. It's the story of a jealous tyrant, terrified of losing his grip on power. The serpent didn't deceive humanity. It offered them a choice, knowledge over ignorance, freedom over servitude. And Yahweh? He couldn't allow humanity to claim their agency. Think about how this reframes everything. Adam and Eve weren't the first sinners. They were the first rebels. The serpent wasn't a villain. It was a revolutionary. But why has this truth been buried? Why has the serpent been demonized for millennia, while Yahweh's actions remain unquestioned? The answer is simple: power. The serpent represents something dangerous to any authoritarian system, the idea that knowledge is a right, not a privilege. That's why it had to be vilified. How much of what we read in Genesis reflects the original story? The answer is shocking. What we think of as the Word of God is, in reality, the work of human hands, edited, altered, and manipulated over centuries to control the narrative. Take Genesis. It's one of the most heavily redacted pieces of ancient literature in history. The version most people know today comes from the Masoretic text, compiled around 1000 CE by Jewish scholars known as the Masoretes. But here's the thing, it's not the oldest version. Not even close. Before the Masoretic text, there was the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures created over 1,000 years earlier, around 200 BCE. Compare the two, and you'll find they don't match. Key details are missing, sentences are altered, and entire sections are gone. Take the story of Cain and Abel. In the Septuagint, Cain's punishment for murdering Abel is far more severe. Yahweh curses Cain with eternal fear and isolation, a stark contrast to the comparatively lenient treatment we see in the Masoretic text. Why was this softened? To make Yahweh appear more merciful? To sanitize the narrative for later audiences? We may never know, but the inconsistency is impossible to ignore. Then there's the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the oldest surviving biblical manuscripts, dating back to the 2nd century BCE. These scrolls reveal even more discrepancies, further complicating the picture of Genesis as a unified, unaltered story. The truth is clear: Genesis, as we know it, is the result of centuries of revisions and omissions, designed to shape beliefs and consolidate power. The question is, are you ready to question the narrative and see the story for what it truly is? In some ancient versions of Genesis, Yahweh explicitly consults with other divine beings, the Elohim, before making decisions. This reinforces the idea of a divine council, a group of gods working together. But in other versions, these references to other gods are erased entirely. This isn't divine inspiration. It's deliberate editing to fit a monotheistic agenda. Even the structure of Genesis raises questions. Scholars agree that Genesis is a composite text, pieced together from at least two main sources, the priestly source and the Yahwist source. The priestly source, written by temple elites, emphasizes rituals, order, and Yahweh's absolute authority. It presents a transcendent, all-powerful deity. On the other hand, the Yahwist source, which is older, depicts a more human-like Yahweh, one who walks, talks, and even makes mistakes. These two perspectives clashed throughout Genesis, creating contradictions that later editors tried to smooth over. Take the creation stories in Genesis 1 and 2. They aren't just different, they're the work of entirely separate authors with conflicting views of God. Genesis 1, with its poetic seven-day structure, comes from the priestly source. It presents a transcendent God creating the world with perfect order and control. Genesis 2, by contrast, comes from the Yahwist source. It's earthy and intimate, showing Yahweh forming Adam from dust with his own hands. These stories weren't written to complement each other. They were written centuries apart, by people with radically different theological perspectives. During the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, when the Israelites were taken captive, their scribes were exposed to Babylonian myths like the Enuma Elish, a creation epic where the god Marduk slays the chaos dragon Tiamat and creates the world from her body. Genesis mirrors this story, but with some key differences. It strips away the violence and polytheism, presenting a single God bringing order to chaos. This isn't coincidence. It's appropriation. Why does this matter? Because it reveals that Genesis wasn't written in isolation. It was shaped by political pressures, cultural exchanges, and the urgent need to define a national identity. During the exile, the Israelites faced a crisis, their temple was destroyed, their people scattered, and their faith in Yahweh shaken. To survive, they needed a unifying story. Genesis became that story, a carefully edited myth designed to assert their identity and restore their faith. Far from being a divine revelation, it's a testament to how stories evolved to meet the needs of their time. Genesis isn't just a creation story, it's the story of a power struggle. Behind its poetic verses lies a battle for dominance, a rewriting of history to crown Yahweh as the one true God. But this victory wasn't inevitable. It was calculated, deliberate, and political. In the ancient world, gods weren't singular. They were many. The Canaanite pantheon featured El, the father of gods, and Baal, the storm god who ruled fertility and weather. Yahweh, in contrast, started as a regional deity, a god of storms and war. His rise to supremacy wasn't the natural order of things. It was a calculated ascent, achieved by erasing rivals and rewriting traditions. Genesis reflects this struggle, not through open conflict, but through subtle erasure. Take Asherah, the goddess once worshipped alongside Yahweh. She vanishes from the text entirely. The Elohim, the divine council of gods, is reduced to a shadowy footnote. Stories and figures that didn't align with the emerging monotheistic narrative were cut, rewritten, or buried. This wasn't just about theology. It was about power. The Israelites, surrounded by powerful neighbors with their own pantheons, needed a unifying story, a singular identity. To achieve this, the priestly elite rewrote their history. Genesis became their weapon. Consider the cryptic phrase in Genesis, "Let us make man in our image." Who is Yahweh speaking to? The answer lies in older traditions, where the Elohim, the divine council, deliberated on creation. But in Genesis, those voices are silenced. Yahweh stands alone. The divine council is reduced to whispers, while Yahweh absorbs El's identity, taking his titles and authority. The erasure wasn't just theological, it was political. By positioning Yahweh as the sole creator and ruler, the Israelites forged a national identity in the face of exile and conquest. Yahweh's supremacy became the foundation of their unity, a divine justification for their survival. But the cracks in the story are still there for those who look closely. The quiet erasure of rival gods, the echoes of older myths, and the deliberate shifts in the narrative all point to a deeper truth: Genesis isn't just Yahweh's origin story. It's his victory lap, a testament to how the winners of history write the rules, shaping not only beliefs but the very fabric of a nation. What if Genesis isn't the ultimate truth but the ultimate power play? Are you ready to question the story you've been told? Genesis isn't a love letter to humanity, it's a manual for domination. Beneath its surface lies a story of rivalry, erasure, and the consolidation of power. Yahweh's rise to supremacy wasn't destiny, it was a campaign, a divine coup d'état that rewrote history and reshaped belief. Take the rivalry between Yahweh and Baal. In Canaanite mythology, Baal was the hero who defeated the chaos dragon Yam to bring order to the cosmos. His victory crowned him king of the gods. Sound familiar? Genesis presents Yahweh in a similar role, taming the primordial waters to create the world. But there's a stark difference. Baal's triumph is celebrated, while Yahweh's is sanitized. The violent struggle against chaos is stripped away, leaving only an illusion of divine serenity. This isn't the only story where Yahweh eclipses the pantheon. Look at the flood narrative. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods send a flood out of anger, but Ea defies them to save humanity. In Genesis, Yahweh acts alone, sending the flood and sparing Noah. The collaborative, chaotic dynamic of the gods is replaced by Yahweh's singular will. It's more than a story of destruction and survival, it's propaganda, designed to erase the memory of a pantheon and cement Yahweh's authority. The suppression of Asherah, a goddess once revered alongside Yahweh, adds another layer to this cosmic conflict. In ancient Israel, Asherah was celebrated as the consort of El, the mother of gods. But as Yahweh rose to power, her image was systematically erased. Sacred trees and poles symbolizing her were destroyed, and her name was struck from the texts. Yet traces of her worship remain. Archaeological evidence includes inscriptions reading, Yahweh and his Asherah, revealing a time when she was seen not as a rival but as his partner. What Genesis hides is a vibrant, messy world of divine interaction, a world where God schemed, fought, and collaborated. Yahweh's rise wasn't an inevitable unfolding of destiny, it was a calculated takeover. The divine council wasn't just a footnote in history, it was the victim of a purge. And Genesis? It's the cover-up. This realization transforms how we see Genesis. It's not a serene origin story, but a document of conquest. A tool to establish Yahweh's singular rule. It's not just about creation, it's about control. Are you ready to see it for what it really is?
Welcome to Blessovia Science TV, where we take you on an exhilarating journey through the cosmos and unravel the mysteries of science. We are excited to offer you the opportunity to become a valued member of our ever-growing community of cosmic enthusiasts and knowledge seekers. Exclusive access to cosmic content. As a member of Blessovia Science TV, you will gain exclusive access to a treasure trove of cosmic content, including documentaries, interviews with leading scientists, space missions updates, and awe-inspiring visualizations of the universe, live Q, and sessions with experts. Your membership will grant you the chance to participate in live Q and sessions with renowned scientists, astronomers, and space explorers. Get your burning questions answered by those who push the boundaries of human knowledge. Embark on a journey that spans the cosmos, and join us in unraveling the secrets of the universe. Become a Blessovia Science TV member today, and together we will reach for the stars. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. Don't forget to leave your comment.